emissions in the state of Oregon. And they can go up to that limit, okay? And when they, from my point of view, when they start manufacturing it, they're able to go up to those limits. So, and then the other pollutants here, they doubled or tripled them what they currently have. So it's really concerning to me, especially when I have family that lives within 2 blocks of the Ronald Acres site. Young girls, 6 and 9 years old, and my daughter and family. I really encouraged a long time ago, as well as the people in New Mexico, I really encouraged, and they in New Mexico encouraged to use the SCORE technique, and that was at the Los Alamos laboratory to do that. And it decreases...
Dale, F-E-I-K, W-C-C-A-N.
Decreases the amount of water, and Intel in the semiconductor industry demands the use of a lot of water, millions of gallons, and also energy. And I wish that Intel hadn't kept using the current technology they haven't got better, but didn't adopt a technology that would be much better for the environment. So I'd encourage anybody to take a look at the SCORR, the supercritical resist remover. And one of the things that removes is stiction, surface adherence. And I participated in the Air Quality Advisory Committee from Intel. I quit because I realized it's controlled too much by Intel. But I still go to the meetings and ask questions. And Shannon, who was the environmental engineer for Intel she's gone. She's gone on to maybe promoted to different things. And so I asked a question, PFAS chemicals. Is PFAS chemicals, those chemicals that are forever chemicals that you can't get away and everybody in their body? And she says, we cannot manufacture without PFAS chemicals. We can't do it. We have to have them. And so the Clean Water Services in Washington County, and that's Baumgartner, and they did a study of the PFAS in water in Washington County. And Intel thought they were controlling them, but they were not. And so the regulatory agency in Washington County said, you got to control that more, and Intel's doing a better job. With that $600,000 wastewater treatment plant, I think you're getting more controls. But so water's an issue, but I'm concerned about PFAS chemicals and those the actual name of them is, they're in their thousands of the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, right? And those are the substances that alter the immune and thyroid function, liver disease, lipid insulin deregulation, kidney disease, adverse reproductive developmental outcomes, and cancer. They're not good, and you can't get rid of them. It costs a lot of money to you really have a hard time to get rid of them. You just can't produce them. But Intel can't do their production without them. So it's a catch-22. So I'm saying, please take a look at the air and the PFAS chemicals that are going to that air. Okay, that's just very important. Now, am I going to come up with a question? I don't know. The one that I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to be done. Different attorney generals, and in particular ours, Ellen Rosenbaum, she filed a suit because the wood stoves do not have the regulations on them that they should. And so you've got different counties doing a stove exchange program, but they're really not effective. And one of the reasons that Intel donates money, you give them hundreds of thousands, a lot of thousands of dollars for the wood exchange program because of the PM 2.5, those small particles go directly in your lungs. Well, Intel is trying to get the wood stove program to work. I would say put more controls at the sites at Intel and don't let those go out instead of having the wood stove program try to eliminate them. So I'm concerned. I know that the DEQ is doing the best they can with the staff they have. They're passionate, they're dedicated, but they just don't have the people that Intel has. And Intel makes multi-billion dollars a year by quarter. And so I'm saying, please put more money into controls for public and environmental health. So do I have a question? So I wrote that question to the CEO of Intel one time, and he said we rely upon the group that we settled with, and new good neighbor agreement, and I resigned for that because it wasn't working. So I gave it. So anyway, please, I'm not giving it. I guess I don't have a question. I mean, more stuff.
That's okay.
All right, there we go. I'm done. Thank you.
No, I do think, because I think I heard a lot in there and really appreciate it, and definitely lots of folks who are appreciating you in the chat. And so I think the one request it sounds like you have is about DEQ putting more money into that agreement. And so I do think it's good to just kind of clarify for folks who might not have read all the stuff that you have, Dale, just what exactly that agreement is. So I'll have Nina kind of go over that real quickly. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much. And then we'll keep running through other questions, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, so for folks that are unfamiliar with this receipts authority provision, it is a provision in Oregon law that was adopted in 1997 that allows businesses, and sometimes it's governments, but entities who wish to pay for dedicated resources for permitting actions to do so through a formal arrangement called a fee agreement. And what Dale is referring to, and what others are perhaps curious about, is that DEQ and Intel do have this fee agreement in place. And the primary folks that are being paid for the agreement are myself, George Davis, the permit writer, and Phil Allen, the air quality modeler. And those are resources above and beyond what is currently available within DEQ for the permitting program. The most important takeaway of this fee agreement is it in no way, shape, or form shortcuts any of the rigor and any of the analysis that has to be conducted, including the public process, for the purposes of DEQ's consideration of this modification. It dedicates resources, and Dale is correct that it's up to $500,000. We have not paid, or Intel has not paid DEQ $500,000. We invoice Intel on a monthly basis based on work that is performed. That's the way all of these agreements are structured, including current ones that are currently in place. And again, I want to assure everyone here on the call that DEQ's goal is to rigorously evaluate what is being proposed by Intel to ensure it can comply and to make sure that public health is protected while we give Intel regulatory certainty. So that's really the goal. And the dedicated resources are very valuable in this particular case because DEQ would not otherwise have them to conduct this. And maybe, Lauren, if I may, one of the questions about, I believe it was from someone named Bede, asking with respect to DEQ not having the resources to do the analysis for the best available control technology. That is exactly what this money pays for. In addition to this very, very in-depth modeling that Intel has to do as a result of the new source review and the trigger that this major modification is the catalyst for. So we don't typically invite a third party to evaluate what's proposed by BACT, but rest assured that DEQ's subject matter experts do have the resources to perform that very thorough analysis to ensure that what is being proposed will be protected. So I'll pause there. I know that's maybe more than what people need, but.
Well, thank you, Nina. So I think this is also a question from Bede, and I think this kind of ties into some of what a lot of the questions are getting at around pollution controls. So this question reads, who will be approving the best available control devices, DEQ, Intel, neutral third party, and, you know, a clear preference for non-Intel, but DEQ is likely overloaded, and so Nina was just kind of speaking to that piece, but can we also answer, I think for you, George, the part of the question about how the best available control technology, whose job it is to review that and how that approval works.
Yes. So the best available control technology, the first part of the analysis, the major part of the analysis, has to be done by Intel or their consultants that they work with. And this is typical across the nation. The facilities themselves have to perform the best available control technology analysis. It's a pretty standardized approach that has to be taken. They submit that as part of the application, and then in this case, it's my job to review that. And ultimately, along the line, I don't have final say in it, but I would make a recommendation to DEQ's management, who ultimately have to sign the permit, that yes, this back analysis should be accepted, or it should be accepted with these changes. So basically, it's DEQ that does it, and of course, if anybody in the audience here, anybody else has thoughts on how the analysis might be done differently, or has suggestions on control devices, we'd be happy to hear it. That's part of what this public process is about. But at the end of the day, it's DEQ that has to approve the best available control technology analysis. That's it.
Thanks, George. I appreciate it. All right. Going down the list of questions we have here, how are offset emission increases restricted regionally? So, like, to clarify, are we seeing disproportionate air emissions in other parts of the metro region as a result of offset trading? I see you again, George. Is this back to you?
I guess it's back to me. Excuse me. The idea behind offsets is that in certain areas, the offset requirement applies, and it's based on the notion that Portland was once a non-attainment area for ozone and carbon monoxide, which means the levels of the pollutants were greater than the national ambient air quality standards. And so for many years, DEQ's regulations and DEQ worked to bring those concentrations down and get into attainment, so we would attain the standards. But EPA requires a little bit more than that. Once you re-attain the standard, once you're there, they want us to make sure we don't go back into non-attainment. So they require what's called a maintenance plan. We have to maintain the ability to stay in compliance with the standard. And one of the maintenance plan requirements is that a facility has to obtain offsets. And this only applies in major new source review cases. But basically what it means is if a facility wants to increase its emissions by 100 tons per year, they have to go find reductions of 100 tons per year from somewhere. That can be from other industrial facilities. It can be from some degree of wood stove changeouts, things like that. But they have to find some reductions. Years ago, I think I mentioned this earlier, DEQ determined that there was actually quite a lot of room left in the Portland airshed for increases of certain emissions. And they created this reserve, which can be used in lieu of offsets. And again, I kind of mentioned this before, like for NOx, it was originally granted 5,000 tons, but only 1,000 tons were released for the first time around. And we still haven't used up that entire first round of 1,000 tons. But one of the provisions in the growth allowance program is that when we reach the end of that first 1,000 tons, DEQ has to analyze the situation to determine whether or not a second 1,000 tons can be released. And it's 20 years later. Things may have changed. I'm personally not aware of any changes, but if, for example, concentrations have been creeping up, then the analysis may say, well, yes, we can release another 1,000 tons, or no, we shouldn't. And so that analysis, I think, will be taking place. I think if we want to talk about it, we have someone here who can. But that's the safety net there. That's part of the growth allowance program. Is that as we get close to using up the first 1,000 tons, we have to analyze to see if it's okay to release any more. That's it.
Thank you, George. So going on to the next question, which is when calculating emissions and determining the Portland AQMA, which fortunately I could phone a friend and someone told me is the air quality management area. Determining the Portland air quality management area has room to expand. Are Intel's emissions concentrations being applied to the entire Portland management area versus the localized area where the emissions are occurring? Let me know, George, if this kind of aligns with that previous question. Go ahead.
It's definitely related. When DEQ does that kind of analysis, it looks at all of the emissions that affect the Portland, the air quality management area, which is effectively the greater Portland metropolitan area. So all of Intel's emissions were considered. Emissions from every other industrial facility that we permit were considered. DEQ also estimates the emissions from non-permitted activities, such as traffic, industrial or commercial operations that are too small to be permitted, everyday emissions that all of us have some part of. I think even household heating. There's so many of us that an individual furnace doesn't make a lot of difference, but a few million does, or 8 million does. So all of the emissions were considered. They are considered for the entire area. The analysis is not done in a localized manner. It analyzed the entire Portland metropolitan area.
Great. Thank you, George. And I think part of that question, just to kind of add on, was also, how does it address like the nearby population versus the broader area? Or is that maybe getting into some of the modeling questions when you're talking about nearby people who would be exposed to pollution?
I think you hit it, Lauren. The greater, the analysis that was done to create the growth allowance certainly looked at the broader area, whereas now in a specific permitting situation, we're looking at the close-in impacts that Phil described earlier. So it kind of crosses into both areas. But certainly for this permitting action, DEQ is looking at the impacts close to the Intel facilities. And again, I'm speaking for Phil, I probably should, but as Phil mentioned, other sources of emissions are taken into account as well. So it's not Intel in isolation, it's Intel plus other surrounding emitting facilities and background emissions as well. So that's it for now.
Thank you. We're just going to try and get through a few more questions, but I do see your hand, Dale. Are you asking specifically about this?
No, I shouldn't speak twice until everybody has an opportunity.
Oh, no, you're good. I just want to make sure if we're in like a thread, it's sometimes helpful rather than bouncing around.
Well, then I would respond to that, but I don't know if I want to raise my hand for that. I've gone to meetings in which, from Washington, whatever, and the leaders of those meetings know about this. Say most industries will do anything so they don't have to submit a major source prevention of significant deterioration application, because in doing that you need to do it regionally. You have to analyze regional data, just not local data. So I just responded to that, but that wasn't the reason my hand's up.
All right, I do see Phil. So yeah, Phil, if you could jump on in, that'd be great.
Okay, just quick to clarify, and George actually drew the distinction before between offsets which are actually emission reductions from other facilities, and the growth allowance, which was essentially a reserve that was established years ago. So in the case of this Intel permit application, the modeling did not take into account a reduction of, for example, NO2 emissions based on the growth allowance. The full amount of emissions that are proposed in their permit applications was used in the modeling.
All right, thank you, Phil. I appreciate you adding that. So the next question we have is on Intel's website. It states that they have a goal of net zero emissions by 2040. How does increasing the gases like and NOx and SO2 meet this? Considering the rules and regulations that many have to follow, such as around having an EPA-approved wood stove or countless rules around water, soil, building, etc. I think, Gail, you were touching on some of these points. It does not seem like it is in line with climate goals of the state. So Intel, it looks like they're asking specifically about you and your goals.
Sure. So hi, I'm Rachel. I sit on Intel's corporate sustainability team, and I manage our climate change program on the operations side. So our net zero goal is to achieve net zero operational greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, which does not include NOx and SO2. So we are committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and achieving that net zero goal by 2040. There are a couple of many different ways that we're going to do that. I can give a few examples. So we're looking at opportunities to reduce waste heat and reduce our dependence on natural gas. We're looking at opportunities to electrify facilities equipment, also reducing our need for fossil fuel combustion. We're also looking at ways that we can implement novel abatement technologies with higher efficiencies and higher removal efficiencies for greenhouse gases. And then we're also looking at opportunities to replace process chemistries at the front end to replace some of those fluorinated greenhouse gases and nitrous oxide.
Okay, and all set.
I think that's it for me. Any follow-up there?
No, I think we're good. Next question is, does the modeling include, so I think, Phil, this sounds like a you question. Does the modeling include the increased poor air quality due to climate change we are already experiencing?
It does in a sense. If you recall on the slide that showed the calculation of total concentrations, background concentrations was included in that total. And the background concentrations would reflect over time what changes in the ambient air quality is from climate change. So for example, if we had a lot of colder winters in Portland over a period of years, and there was more burning of wood in wood stoves, we would find a rise in the particulate matter concentrations as background. And the same would be true in the summertime. If we had an increase, vast increase in the number of forest fires, in the ambient air over time would be monitored, and we would include that change in the background in the total calculation of the concentration. So yes, over time it would be included.
Okay, and there's a related question, Phil, so I might keep you on for a minute just so, again, we can kind of group these questions. It helps me track them more for sure. And it's about sort of evaluating health impacts. And folks are asking, how old is the data that you use for modeling concentrations from nearby sources? Are you looking at the significant changes happening in our region with increased traffic, increased housing, decreased farm and forestry lands that are carbon eaters, et cetera? Are you forecasting 5 to 20 years out on how emissions will be increased historically in our area and our region? So I think you kind of got at that just then, but I think it might be helpful to tie this bit into.
Well, there's a lot of questions there. So just tackling one at a time. So briefly, there is a lot of change in the Hillsborough area, for example, but our emissions inventory lags what is actually happening on the ground. And so we have to use the most current inventory of sources as they're being permitted. So in addition to that, a lot of these sources that are permitted to begin construction, but they may not actually operate at their permitted emission levels for a number of years down the road. So it's a very difficult number to come up with. And so we rely on what information we have in our database based on the permits that have been issued. So it may be out of date, but you can't change. You can't you can't quantify these changes on a very quick basis. So there was what was the other?
And so that was the part about age, and then they're asking, are you looking at significant changes happening? Like, does that? And it seems like maybe that's the ambient air piece about increased traffic, increased housing, farming, forestry lands.
Right. So those typically non-permitted sources would be included in the background, and those background levels are based on monitoring and other tools that are used to analyze what those background emissions are.
And the last piece of this question is, are you forecasting 5 to 20 years out on how emissions will be increased holistically in the area or the region?
No, we were just not able to do that. And that's really not the focus. It's really a near-term analysis, not able to project.
Okay, yeah, thank you for answering those questions. All right, so yeah, Dale, how about we go to you, and then I'm still tracking folks. I know if you have some questions there, I have them, and we'll get back to them.
I noticed that KOIN 6 and K2 is on here, so I'm Dale Feek, 503-504-5972. So if you want more information from me, give me a call. Dale Feek, 503-504-5972. What I'd much prefer fence line monitoring, not this modeling. And EPA recommends that. If you really want to know what's coming out of a facility, you do spectrometer monitoring at the fence line. Okay, and I proposed that a long time ago through the Air Quality Advisory Committee group, and I even got a spectrometer, and Intel uses one, but they didn't want to go for that. So for health, you really need to know through data that's real, not just modeling data. So I would really encourage thousands and millions of dollars being spent on fence line data and not just modeling.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and glad to have some media folks here. I know that's another way that people get this information. So someone said that they got sent an article. It might have been yours, Dale, but really appreciate all of that. So our next question is, and then I see the new hand from Brad. I saw that in the chat. I'm glad we got that sorted. But as someone who lives very close and grows a lot of food in my garden, and I think we have a couple of these, it's a question about soil deposition. And I don't know if someone can kind of answer how that relates to the analysis that we do for this. Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, so as part of the air quality analysis of the proposed emissions, this vegetation in soil is part of that analysis. And a lot of that depends on deposition. And there's a section in the modeling report that actually discusses that at some length. And I would encourage people to go and take a look at that. And the conclusion was that at the levels of emissions, primarily of NOx emissions, the soil impacts are well below the thresholds that are available. So.
Awesome. And I will link to that in the chat here in just a moment. Brad, why don't you go right ahead and ask your question?
Not so much a question as an emphasis on Dale's point. At one point in my life, I worked at a company. I was a contractor, and they were located very close to a meat producing facility that used ammonia for refrigeration. And part of the company I was contracted to, their employee well-being and safety, was they set up fence line ammonia monitors all along their property because they were afraid of an ammonia spill from their neighbor. And sure enough, when one happened, they were able to catch it in enough time to prevent exposure to their employee population. Dale's point of having fence line monitors for Intel makes a lot of sense in protecting the residential population surrounding Intel's facilities.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brad. I appreciate that example. All right, so we got that question. When measuring total concentration to calculate impact, how is the volume being calculated? Is there a team of clarity? I have to say, outside the presentation, I'm not sure the volume. I don't know. That might be a modeling question.
Yes, that would be a modeling question. Kristen, thank you.
Oh, dispersion.
Yeah, I'm Kristen Martin. I'm the air quality modeler here at DEQ. And I guess I'm not 100% sure what it's asking, but I can do my best. And so I'm assuming the volume, because it's micrograms per cubic meter. And so the cubic meter part is probably the volume. And so that is estimated through the tool that Phil talked about, AirMod. We're taking this mass of emissions and we are basically moving it through the air, and he showed that graphic of this column of kind of air pollution that moves through it and it impacts. And so the model itself can take into account, per this, if you picture this cubic meter of air, how much of that pollution is in there. And so that's all done through the calculations in the model based on the atmospheric conditions, the wind, and then how much of that emissions is coming out. So if that didn't answer your question, or if it was supposed to be in a different direction, please let me know.
Yeah, feel free to add if you missed it. Let's see. So the next question, let's see, there is a quick question about, while I read and process this other one, is about how long this proposed permit would last, I think, and does it need to be reapproved on a particular schedule? I think that would be really helpful for everyone.
Yeah, I think I would like George. George, if you can come on to respond to that, because you talked a little bit about how this will be subsumed as part of the current permit, so it'd be really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Yes, the permits, the types of permits that Intel has to apply for are typically issued for 5 years at a time, but then they if they apply for renewal in time, the permit is extended, and that's just a recognition of the reality that DEQ often cannot issue permits as quickly as we'd like. So the direct answer to the question is yes, the permit has to be renewed periodically. If this permit were issued today, for example, it would be good for 5 years, and Intel would have to apply for renewal between 6 months and a year before it expired in order to keep it going. But yeah, it's there is a renewal process that goes on, and so permits get updated at least as frequently as every 5 years, or not at least. They're supposed to be updated every 5 years. We get to them as quickly as we can.
All right, great. Thank you. Let's see. The next question I have is about, let's see, density of the area and other pollution sources. They're kind of two around the same topic. So as Intel is already in such a dense area of possible pollutant sources, not just from them, but from other sources, then wouldn't allowing them to increase pollutants be detrimental to surrounding residents? Yeah, go ahead. Ooh, you're on mute.
I saw George pop up, so I muted myself. Okay. Sorry. Kristen Martin again. I think so that, all the discussion that Phil had about the modeling is why we do that modeling, is to look to make sure that the surrounding residents will not have the ambient air quality levels exceeded due to this permit action. And so we include all of the activity of the model, that all the nearby sources get included for their emissions as well. And then we look at, Phil showed that graphic with all those little hash marks of we are evaluating impacts at all of those locations. And so we are confident, as we review this modeling, we will not issue the permit until we're confident that the concentrations and the ambient air quality standards will not be exceeded.
Thanks, Kristen. And then a question about monitoring. How are you, this is N for DEQ, how are you monitoring Intel and other businesses closer to prevent our exposures, especially when their safety equipment fails? And there's a link to an example. So can somebody jump on and kind of talk about what's in the permit, and then we can maybe talk about it also more broadly from a DEQ perspective.
Sure. Okay. So with respect to the permit, and maybe a little bit outside the permit as well, DEQ, in addition to, when we issue these permits, we try to become as familiar as we can with the facility and understand what it does, how it does it, and what things we should be watching out for. So that's part of the whole permit process. Once a permit is in place, facilities are subject to periodic inspection. Intel is probably inspected every 2 years. That's our standard frequency for large industrial facilities in the state of Oregon. And of course, we can go in anytime we want to. That happens occasionally, but it's not often, but a surprise inspection can in fact be held. But more to the point, Intel has to do a lot of monitoring itself. So they have to keep records of what they use. They have to keep records of the amount of production material they use. They have to keep records of their fuel usages, their hours of operation, things like that. And all of those records go into reporting to DEQ what their emissions are. I think they report twice a year, but they have to report for every 12 continuous month periods. So they're reporting for 6 months each time. And when we conduct inspections, the inspection is largely about making sure that record keeping and reporting is accurate. So that's really kind of how the facility is monitored in the regulatory sense. If the question is about ambient air quality monitoring, DEQ does not specifically monitor individual facilities. Our ambient monitoring network is set up to sample from representative areas in an airshed, areas that are, locations that have been determined to be representative of the greater area. So I hope I kind of touched on what the question was about.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, George. There's a question about, does the permitting process take into consideration the negative impact of farmland loss / expanding the urban growth boundary that is proposed? Why are we not protecting our farmland?
Thanks, Lauren. I'll address that question. It's obviously a very important issue. The scope of this permit is exclusive to air quality, so this modification, the proposed modification, will not take into account impacts to farmland. And with regard to the urban growth boundary and any land use decisions, those would be made exclusively at the local government level. So that would be either Washington County and or City of Hillsborough or other jurisdictions. So.
Okay. Thank you. And then one last question, and then we'll get back to you, Dale. Could you confirm how long the model projects out? I see. Yeah. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. How dynamic is this model? How many factors is the model looking at? So I think, Phil, part of at least what I'm understanding, and Drew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, there was the question about, how this thing how the model thinks about climate change and other sort of evolving issues, which is going to change over time. So is the model sort of looking at a single point in time, like when we're being permitted, or is it trying to model like future states of Intel, or does that happen like at the permit renewal stage?
Right. No, it's a snapshot in time. And to the extent, the former question about the effects of climate change. So if the model were rerun, say in in 5 years from now, the background levels would have changed. So those would be included, but we can't predict what those will be. So the model is a snapshot as to what the current emissions are that we can evaluate.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I hope that helps, Drew. Dale, over to you.
Thank you. Way back when, maybe this is 2015, 2014, Intel had air contaminant discharge permit, and during that permit, at the beginning of that permit, they have to answer questions. If they answer 5 questions with a yes, then they're required to submit a risk management plan at the federal level. And those plans are only stored closest to us in Seattle. So I spent 2 days going up to Seattle, and I read the risk management plan of New Mexico, Arizona, and Oregon. And the general statement of all of those were exactly the same. They said exactly the same thing. And as I read through those, you're not allowed to take a camera, your phone, or anything. All you can do is read them and take notes, okay? And I was disappointed, especially when you have the Cascadia earthquake and the plan that was written there based upon all those. Intel is classified as extremely hazardous facility because of the number and the type of substances, chemicals on site. So they're an extremely hazardous facility, not only because of what comes out of the stacks and goes in the water, but because of the chemicals they have and the corrosive, explosive potential for harm. And so that's based upon the community right to know law, emergency management community right to know law. And so I wrote an email to the county commissioners in 2015, and I noticed that Nafisa Fai's on here. She's a current county commissioner. But I wrote it in 2015, and I because there was not a local emergency planning committee at the county level. And so I presented that to the county, let them know what their obligations were. And fortunately, there was a former Coast Guard officer that was now the director of emergency management planning in Washington County. And he said, yes, we need to do that. And he's helped get the regulations written by the state level in 2015. And he was determined to get it done, and he's done it. Now, by that I mean, there is now, in 2022, there are bylaws, there are officers. There's an officer, and he's the chair. The chair of that is a environmental person for lamb research in Tigard area. So it's industry. So now what happened is that Scott Porter, he's currently on being hired, but as a part-time person, he's no longer the director. And he worked with 40 industries in Washington County. And what he did is he ended up they work together, decide whether people need to stay in place or evacuate. based upon the chemicals the worst chemicals that could come out of those 40 sites. And then they did plume models on those. Now those are a public document, and so I'm working now to make sure. Hopefully we could get those put on our. I'm project director of Hillsborough Air and Water, and we went into DEQ and requested all of their air contaminant discharge permit, the Title V permits, their standard and general permits, and we digitally copied them all. And anyway, so then what happened is then we know where all those permits are in Washington County, also Multnomah County, but I'm interested in Washington County. So we have them on our site. And what I really want now is for people that want to know, then they can request, because this is public information, they can request through the county how to get those site-specific plans and know what the people that wrote that, the industry that wrote it with the emergency director, where they are. So it's very important for the public to understand the extremely hazardous facilities that have around them and plans to help, how they can protect themselves if there's a hazard. So if anybody wants to know more about that, I gave them my telephone number, 503-504-5972, and I will inform you and get you connected. And I feel very fortunate that Washington County spent the money and did this. They've got a local emergency plan, and we ended up, I wasn't involved in the agenda, but the last agenda we had a sheriff, we had a Beaverton police officer, he works for the sheriff, and he did an actor-shooter presentation for 30 minutes. And then also, anyway, and I shared that with other people and with our county. But the other thing we decided, instead of actually zeroing in on the industries, and now Intel has that too, in Aloha and Ronald Acres. Those plans are made, site-specific plans. We have them. Okay. But then what we decided, instead of worrying about them exploding on the site, we decided we better attack how I went to the state conference in Redmond on local emergency planning committees, and the chair of that did too. And so what we decided, this local thing now, we're really concerned about the transportation, how those chemicals get to those factories, the transportation from trucks and rails and whatever, because those create a major, as the train wrecks and all those things, you can have major catastrophes. And there needs to be a response to that. Naturally, you want to prevent that, just like you want to prevent a shooter from killing people. How does your organization kind of arrange it so that you can get that person so he doesn't kill people? Same thing. How do you end up trying to prevent these things? Okay. So anyway, if anybody's interested more in Washington County local emergency planning committee stuff, let me know. 503-504-5972. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. Yeah, appreciate you doing the work.
Lauren,
Yeah, George.
can I burst in here for a moment?
Yeah.
Dale's comments just now kind of reminded me that I don't think I completely answered the question that I attempted to answer a few moments ago.
Sure.
And a little bit getting to Dale's points as well. I think part of the question was, what about safety of people? And I think it was probably with regard to the fact that Intel does have hazardous materials on its site. And what I want to mention is that DEQ regulates the emissions from the production process. Things like the storage of hazardous materials are actually regulated by the state fire marshal, and perhaps also now, as Dale mentioned, at the local level. Those are basically out of DEQ's hands and in the hands of the state fire marshal. And then transportation. Again, DEQ doesn't regulate the transportation. There are hopefully other entities that are looking at the safety of those things. So, be aware that the facility like that is regulated by multiple state and local agencies for different aspects that all kind of pertain to the environment. But that it's just, the protection of the employees is up to the occupational safety and health folks, and that also helps protect individuals outside of the facility, because if you're protecting the employees, you're hopefully also protecting the public. So I just wanted to mention that to maybe complete an incomplete answer. Thank you.
Thanks, George. I appreciate you adding that. That's really helpful. And I do see one more question that came in. Yeah, Drew, I appreciate you asking these questions and trying to understand, because I'm sure lots of people have the same question. So again, about modeling. So Phil or Kristen, with a permit that lasts 5 years and that can be renewed for a total of 10, about projecting into the future the impact of the emissions. So I just want to make sure, if there's a way to be kind of clear about when it is that we do this modeling, because I think what I heard is that it happens at one particular point in time and it captures that moment. Is there a moment where we do it again to kind of update that? How does that work?
I'll let Kristen answer that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so Phil addressed it before that, projecting into the future for us at this moment is we don't have the data to project. We project all of the emissions that Intel is planning to emit in the future, and so that's what we're modeling. But as far as the issues of climate change and how the area might change, that partially gets addressed with as those other sources that grow and come into the area do analyses. Intel's emissions will be included in those analysis as competing sources, and so we do kind of try to look at the broader area as things move forward and as things change. The other question I think that Lauren asked there is, when would they have to redo this modeling? And so, that many times facilities will end up doing modifications that trigger additional modeling. And so, facilities like Intel do modeling occasionally to add emission sources or have changes at their facility. So we would look at it then. And then other times that it doesn't necessarily have to, but trigger additional modeling is, if we have, lower national ambient air quality standards in which we have to meet new standards, we would evaluate if there are facilities that we are concerned about, and then DEQ can request additional information. Again, it's been talked about before with Clean Air Oregon, that that's a resource question as well, to try to keep up with that type of work, so it doesn't always happen as timely as maybe we all would hope it would happen, but that is another area where we may look at modeling again.
And if I may add a little bit more, one of the primary backstops to all of this work is the ambient air quality monitoring network. Of course, it's looking at the general air quality across the Portland metropolitan area. But if DEQ starts seeing a trend of approaching a standard, then that, as Krista, that if we start seeing a problem, we're going to start taking action. We do not want to get back into a non-attainment status that carries all kinds of bad things with it. Not the least of which is possible health effects. So we do not want to go there. So if we start seeing the area approaching an air quality standard, DEQ is going to start taking action to prevent it from getting worse. So that's the ultimate backstop. So the modeling may not be repeated. It may not be repeated for quite a long time on Intel, depending on when they come back in for perhaps a future modification. But the backstop is the ambient air quality monitoring.
Thanks, George. That helps. And Drew, if you have further questions, I think Kristen and or Phil might be working on putting their emails in the chat. I know sometimes where it's me reading and people responding, it's not really the most productive way to have that kind of conversation. So feel free to reach out to folks. Like I said, we're in the conversation period of this process. So it's, we really want to hear, and thanks, Kristen, for doing that. We really want to hear from you and make sure that you get your questions answered. And I know this isn't always the best platform, which is why there is more time. Yeah, Dale, I see your hand up.
Well, okay, I don't want to dominate. If everybody else wants to talk, I will, I guess. Commitments are important. I committed to my wife that we would be forever, and we've been married 52 years and wonderful kids and grandkids and all that. So the commitments are good, but there are a lot of people that don't get married that long and stay because it's hard to keep a commitment. And so you have different countries that are making commitments on greenhouse gases reduction. You have DEQ that made a commitment to reduce transportation, agriculture, forestry related to greenhouse gases. And if you take a look at the graph, and I made public comment before the Environmental Quality Commission about this, the graph shows you're not making the commitment. It's not working. And so, you can have a lot of commitments, but if you don't have actions to fulfill those commitments, the commitments don't mean anything. And so at least we have Cleaner Air Oregon. And that is a commitment with an action. And so I really appreciate DEQ implementing that as it's designed, but you need staff to do it. And that's the reason I like Intel's fee agreement. You got $500,000, right? To get another $500,000. Because you can renew the agreement, right? You get other people besides George. George is good. I agree with that, and I've worked with George before. But get some other people in there working on this. And as I said before, you don't shorten based upon what the rule is, the Oregon rule on this. You still have to go through the process and get a lot of people working on it to help you out. So commitments are fine. Action and outcomes is really what's more important. And Ali, who is the air administrator for Oregon, used to work for Delaware in there. And when I was involved in this greenhouse gas with Intel before, Intel convinced the Environmental Quality Commission to do a temporary rule for 6 months because there was a rule stating about greenhouse gases, and it was a harder rule to implement, and Intel didn't want to do it. So Intel convinced the Department of Environmental Quality to do a temporary rule to wait until the Supreme Court came out with a ruling. And it came out they didn't have to do it. Well, Intel got 6 months. They didn't have to do the prevention of significant deterioration rule. And so they got away with got away with an air contaminant discharge permit instead of prevention of significant deterioration permit. And so I am, you trust, but you verify. And so, and what Ali did in Delaware, DEQ had the option of maintaining their stricter standard. And in Delaware, they did that. They had a stricter standard, they kept it. Oregon, through lobbying the Environmental Quality, DEQ and the Environmental Quality Commission, decided to not keep their stricter standard and went to a lower standard. And so I really appreciate DEQ's staff, air specialists, monitoring. Intel's been fined $143,000 because they broke the fluorides for 30 years without a valid permit. They did a construction without a valid construction permit to do so. Anyway, so they got fined $143,000, and they can make that in 8 minutes. It doesn't make any difference. So, and then they got fined again because one of their controls didn't work. So they got recently $114,000 fine. And so because there's the option of having more stuff coming out at once if the controls aren't working right. And that is more dangerous to people that are on the fence line. So anyway, those are just statements that I just wanted people to hear. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think it would be helpful if we have our folks, because we knew greenhouse gases would probably be a topic that people were wondering about. So we have some folks from our Office of Greenhouse Gases who can maybe kind of share a little bit about what DEQ is doing. So, Colin, I think, yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Can you hear me all right, Lauren? Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Colin McConaughey. I run the Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs here at DEQ, and Dale, I wanted to respond to a couple things I heard in there from you, specific to greenhouse gas emissions. There was a lot there. Some of it in regards to toxics and other pollutants, and some of it in relation to greenhouse gas emissions. And I've worked in this area in the state of Oregon for many years now, and for many of those years, the emissions, as we measure them in Oregon, the greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon, we're not trending toward our greenhouse gas reduction goals. But I think that's now about to change in a major way, and I just wanted to share that. There's been two major new climate mitigation policies adopted in the state of Oregon. One of them was the direction of legislature 2 years ago, requiring essentially all of our electricity to have no emissions from its generation by 2040. And then the second is our Oregon Climate Protection Program that our Environmental Quality Commission adopted also a couple of years ago. And with the onset of those two major new programs that do directly require greenhouse gas emission reductions, our outlook for future emissions in Oregon is dramatically different. And if I can just quickly, I know it's late in the evening, share my screen and just shows that this is a picture with 1,000 words. Here's the scenario. Is that coming up? Okay, sounds great. What we see there is just as the slide says, forecast of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions. And along the top here are DEQ's previous forecasts that we predicted a steady, gradual rise in statewide greenhouse gas emissions due to expected growth in population and economic output. And at the time, unfortunate connection between those two factors and our greenhouse gas emissions, meaning as population rises, absent public policy, greenhouse gas emissions tend to rise, same with economic output. But with these two major new programs now just beginning to take effect, the forecast of our greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon is way, way different, as you can see, a massive change from previous forecasts. So, a couple of things you said there just sparked my interest in sharing that, because I know there is a lot of, as was mentioned earlier, there is a lot of concern about greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. And I think these two new programs speak to Oregonians' interest and concern in these areas. And with that, Lauren, I think I can hop back off. I just wanted to share that there with folks.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Colin. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Nina. I know we are right kind of at our time that we promised you, but yeah, I really appreciate the conversation, and I just want to make sure folks really get this concept about next steps. So let me get my screen back up and rolling, and then Nina, it's all you.
Well, I don't know, that's a lot of pressure. I just want to thank Commissioner Fye for her gratitude and really to just put it back out to everyone. We so appreciate everyone's willingness to attend this evening. I want to go over a couple of what's next steps. As Lauren said, many of us have put our respective emails in the chat. That is why we're here. I've had a little sidebar with Sydney about ways we can augment the way that we are currently publicizing information about this proposed modification. And I just told her she would regret the offer to consult with us. So thank you again for that, Sydney. And I will be in touch. So here's what's going to happen. Regarding Cleaner Air Oregon, as J.R. Giska mentioned, the call-in is based on the prioritization. Intel is in group number 2, and that will occur in 2024. Secondly, for permitting, we are going to start to consider what we are hearing tonight, what we're going to continue to hear until we're ready with a draft permit to put out on public notice, which I'll get to in just a moment. And then modeling, we are continuing to review the dispersion modeling that Intel has submitted to us to ensure that it's going to meet those national ambient air quality standards, the NAAQS, which are in place at the federal level nationwide to protect public health. When we have a draft permit, can't project the exact time frame of that this evening, we will make it available for public comment. We will have an actual hearing very similar to this, but we will be taking formal comment on the record. And whether you want to, tell us about BACT, or you want to tell us about, concerns or whatever we have in terms of conditions in the permit, that would be the time that you'll be able to comment formally. And that'll be a public hearing. So that is a distinctly different step in the process. And then we will respond to comments and then issue a permitting decision at the conclusion of that review of public comment. So I know you've seen some contact information in the chat. Sorry, Lauren, I'm getting to that point where my bandwidth is really narrowing. But if you go to the next slide, I think my information is reiterated. If you want to sign up to receive information about air quality permits generally, we have a Gov Delivery email address, and all the public notices for any project or regulatory action that intersect is actually posted here. So please keep them coming. Keep the cards and letters coming. And I just want to thank everyone again for your time and attention and willingness to stay involved in our process. Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.